येनाक्षरसमाम्नयमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयं नत्वा सरस्वतीं देवीं शुद्धां गुण्यां करोम्यहं पाणिनीयप्रवेशाय लघुसिद्धान्तकौमुदीम्। Before we start with the discussion, a couple of questions that were asked offline. Let me just resolve them quickly. So first one was, I think more than one people actually asked this to me about the Matra discussion. So this was in the context of Ralo Vyupadhadhalade Samsha versus Ralo Upadhadhalade Samsha. So the way matras are counted, even the way Laghu and Guru is counted in the Chanda is completely different than the way it is counted in Vyakarana, and this is a common source of confusion. So in the Vyakarana, in order to count the Laghu and Guru, or in order to count the matras, you first have to break it down into individual swaras and vyanjanas. So for example, if you take say Sudha, then Sa, U, Dha, A, it becomes four components. In the Chandas, it will be just Su and Dha, two components. In the Vyakarana, it will be four components. And then for each of them, you have to assign a matra. A Vyanjana gets half a matra, Hrasva gets one matra, Dirghaswara gets two matras, Plutaswara gets three matras. So there is also a shloka in this category. I don't know if some of you might have known this shloka. Ekamatro bhavedrasvaha dvimatro dirgha uchyate trimatrastu pluto ज्ञेयः vyanjanam tvardhamatrikam. So this is how the matras are counted in case of Vyakarana. Similarly, there is a difference between the counting of Laghu and Gurus. So in case of Chandas, for example, if you have a terminal Hal letter, the previous Swara gets counted as a Guru, but that's not how it happens in the Vyakarana. In the Vyakarana, terminal Hal letter is ignored and we just say Halam. So over there is still a Laghu entity in the Vyakarana. So there is a slight difference in the way Laghu and Guru are counted in Vyakarana and in the Chandas. That is important for sutras like Ijadesh, Guru Mato, Nruchaha. So there are concepts like Guru and Laghu exploited for in this manner in Vyakarana. So that was the first thing. So then once this background is set, the calculations of Vyupadha versus Upadha should now fit in the proper calculations. So Upadha is actually half a matra more. So we are actually saving on half a matra when we are doing Vyupadha instead of Upadha. So now this actually reminds me of a little tangential point, which I can anyway, we are going a lot of astray. So anyway, I can talk this. There is this sutram, Achishnu Dhatu Bhruvam. Have people heard this sutram? Maybe you have already studied it or started studying it in the Ikaranta Shabdas. So Achishnu Dhatu Bhruvang Voho Iyanguango iti sutram asti. Asya adhyanam idanim na avashyakam. Parantu asmin sutre, so this particular Voho is a very interesting word over here. This is exactly like Vyupadha. In Vyupadha, you have Va and Ya. You see, here there is Yoho, Ya and Va and O. So the combination has been reversed. So Achishnu Dhatu Bhruvang Vyoho Iyanguango. Now, what is this Vyoho? It is E plus U and the Shashti Dvivachanam of that. Now, you see the striking similarity between this and Ralo Vyupadhadhalade Samsha. In the Ralo Vyupadhadhalade Samsha, it was U plus E. Here, he has made just a reverse E plus U. Okay, is exactly the same thing. Now, in this sutram, he makes E plus U because here, whether it is U plus E or E plus U won't make a difference in the number of matras. So, he prefers to have it in the normal order. Whereas here, in case of Ralo Vyupadhadhalade Samsha, there is a half a matra difference. So he can actually save on that matra. More interesting point is this. Understand this point. When he combines E plus U, he gets a U, and then there is a Shashti Dvivachanam of that, which is Vyoho. So he is actually using Vyoho to indicate E and U letters together. Forget about the meaning of the sutras. Understand this point. Now, what are the number of matras in Vyoho? There is a Y, which is half a matra. There is a V, which is another half a matra. And there is an O, which is a full two matras. Because it's a Dirgha Swara, so Dirgha Swara counts towards two matras. So Vyoho is actually three matras, and the Visarga you can keep it aside for now, or you can take half a matra for Visarga. But this is Y half a matra, V half a matra, and O full matra. And by doing all this, what he has achieved is combination of E and U. if you look at Maheshwara Sutras now, in this context, if you look at Maheshwara Sutras, it is very easy to capture E and U with a single pratyahara called ina. If you take a pratyahara called ina, ayuna, you just take that E and combine it with na. That ina pratyahara can also represent only E and U. And if you use that in a pratyahara, the shashti ekavachanam, now you don't need a dvivachanam because it's a pratyahara, so it can just be inaha. So instead of yoho, you can actually have an inaha, which is a smaller version. E is only one matra, ina is half a matra, and aha is, I say, one matra. So it's definitely a smaller version than talking about vyoho.
इन् प्रत्याहारः सर्वदा परेण नकारेण भवति
Wait,
खलु
wait,
महोदय?
wait, 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 wait. I'll come to that. I'll come to that. But id pratyahara sarvada parena nakareణ kimartham bhavati? What is the problem if we take the id pratyahara with this? You're actually saving, isn't it? Look at this sutram. In achishnu dhatu bruam vyoho, the word vyoho captures e and u. Forget about the meaning of the sutram. We don't care about the meaning of the sutram. All that we care is vyoho is capturing e and u. The easier way to capture that would be to create a pratyahara called ina pratyahara using the purvanakara. If you create an ina pratyahara using the purvanakara, it will be inaha. Shashti ekvachanam. You don't use a dvivachanam because see here there are two individual letters, so you have to use a dvivachanam. In case of inaha, it is a pratyahara, like you say iko yan achi. Ach has so many letters, but you use a ekavachanam achi. In the same way, you can use an ekavachanam over here if you take a pratyahara. If it is individual letters, you have to respect the number 2, 3, 4, and so on. But when it is a pratyahara, it's a single pratyahara. So you can actually take inaha. Now, what is the number of matras in inaha? E is one matra. R, the Vyanjana is half a matra, so it's 1.5. And let's take aha as 1.5 matra, for example, or say 1 matra, so it's 2.5. In the same way, in the yoho, ya is half a matra, v is half a matra, so that's 1 matra, o is 2 more matras, so 3 matras. You understand what I'm saying? So using inaha is actually better than using vyoho. Still Panini does not use inaha. Still Panini uses vyoho. This is a proof that tells us nakar ina pratyahare nakaraha parena nakarena. If ina pratyahare nakaraha was possible purvena nakarena, instead of yoho, you would have used inaha. The fact that he says instead of inaha, let's use vyoho is basically says that let's not get confused ourselves. Ina pratyahara nityam parena nakarena svikriyate. Okay, so the whole this discussion is actually tangential, but I remembered this. This is in the context of ina pratyahara. We were talking about ina pratyahara. Ana pratyahara is always purvena nakarena except for anudit savarnasya cha pratyaha. Ina pratyahara is always parena nakarena, and you see a case over here where ina pratyahara can be used in the purvena nakarena by saving a matra, but he doesn't do that because to avoid the confusion. So what that act shows that ina is always to be used the second ina when we talk about the ina pratyahara. Any questions on this aspect? Yes, Umaji.
There is another sutram, Lopo Vyor Vali.
In Lopo Vyorvali, it is V and Y. It is not E and U. Lopo Vyorvali is physical letters V and Y. It has nothing to do with E and U. In Ralo Vyupadha Dhalade Samsha, it was E and U. The Sandhi made it Vyu, right? What is
यूस्त्राख्योनधि
in Ustriakhyanadi also? It is Dirgha Ikara and Dirgha Ukara. So that sutra cannot be used for discussion of the Ina Pratyahara. This is the only sutram that we use for a discussion of Ina Pratyahara because it has Hrasva Ikara and Hrasva Ukara in that order. Clear? So if this is clear, we'll move to the next topic. Okay, so the second question that was asked was regarding the terms Sarvadhatuka and Ardhadhatuka. So the question was whether the letter should be considered as Sarvadhatuka and Ardhadhatuka. So understand this on a very theoretical note, Latta has to be Ardhadhatuka because it has we have to adhere to the Tingshit Sarvadhatukam Sutram. But being that Ardhadhatukam is not a great victory or great deal anything, Lat usually gets converted to Tittasji or it gets converted to Shatrushanich. Latta Shatrushanachava Prathama Samanadhikarani. So in either of the cases, it's going to get converted to a Sarvadhatuka Pratyaya. So it might be okay to just short circuit that and say lat is a sarvadhatuka lakara. Then don't use the word pratyaya. Lat is a sarvadhatuka lakara is what you can say.
So that means all the lakaras are arthadhatuka then.
Not lakaras again. All the pratyayas,
Okay.
lakara pratyayas by definition are ardhadhatuka lakara pratyayas. That is correct.
Whereas 4 lakaras, lat, lot, vidhiling, and lang, can be considered sarvadhatuka lakaras.
Just for ease of study, just for ease of understanding. See, understand this point. Lakara being sarvadhatuka versus ardhadhatuka is not what Panini teaches us. It's only the
No,
pratyaya being sarvadhatuka or ardhadhatuka. Okay, but yeah, what you're saying is right. For all practical purposes, because these lakaras eventually end up in ting and sadhar adeshas, you can give them a sarvadhatuka lakara term.
yeah, and for them the vikarna pratyaya comes in, it plays a role, all of those, whereas in other lakaras the vikarna pratyaya does not come in.
So again, that statement is half complete because when you say vikarana pratyaya, you always at the back
Lakar,
of your
yeah,
mind.
gana vikarna pratyaya.
Gana vikarna.
Yeah. So when you say lakara vikarana, when you say vikarana pratyaya is both lakara and
Correct.
gana,
Satyam,
right?
satyam.
So yeah.
So lakara vikarna pratyaya comes in the others, gana vikarna pratyaya comes in the sarvadhatuka lakara.
Correct, 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 correct. So तत्र एकः एव विषयः इदानीम् अवशिष्टः अस्ति. अत्र एतेषु सर्वेषु सूत्रेषु हकारद्वयस्य ग्रहणं किमर्थं णकारद्वयस्य ग्रहणं किमर्थं. So you have two nakaras, one in the ayuna and other in the lana, and the reason we have already seen, it is because the Bhashyakara or the Maheshwara or Panini, whosoever wants to tell us, Vyakyanato Vishesha Pratipattir Nahi Sandehada Lakshanam. This has already been taught. I showed this paribhasha in the Paribhashindu Shekhar in one of the previous classes. We learnt a few lines from that paribhasha. So Nakaradvayasya Grahanam Vyakyanato Vishesha Pratipatti iti tasya prayojanam. Hakaradvayasya Grahanam kimartham. Why do you need two hakaras in the Maheshwara Sutra? Anybody wants to comment, or shall I just go with the formal proof?
झल् प्रत्याहारः.
Jhal pratyahara is there, correct. So jhal pratyahara
वल्
requires a hakara, val pratyahara requires a hakara. Yes. So basically there are two different styles in which we are going to go with this proof. One is we will not look at the individual pratyaharas as such, but what we will look at the whole 14 Shiva Sutras and come up with a mathematical treatment. And so using logic and mathematics, we will show that hakara cannot be at one place. This is a simple mathematical answer. Then we will go to the second approach, which is there in your books, in many of the books, including Sudha Teeka, where you take a bunch of pratyaharas, actually look at those pratyaharas, look at the sutras for those pratyaharas and say that for these pratyaharas, the first hakara is needed, for these pratyaharas, the second hakara is needed, and you cannot mix and match. So this is the second approach. So let's go to the both approaches. Let's look at the mathematical approach. It's very beautiful, mind-boggling. It's very easy to grasp and capture. So tatra kim asti, let's assume hypothetically that there is some rearrangement of all these varnas, whichever you want. There is some magical rearrangement of all these varnas so that ha can be only placed in one place, one location. You don't need a double hakara. Whatever random permutation for these, we don't know how it looks like, but let's assume it looks like in some way. Now let's think about how these varnas would be arranged. We definitely need a pratyahara called acha, which is all the swaras. So therefore all swaras must be in one place. Whatever is their order, we don't care, but all swaras must be together. Similarly, we need a pratyahara called yara, yaronunasik enunasikova, which consists of all the vyanjanas except hakara. So all these vyanjanas again must be together at some other place. So we again don't care order, but we know that all the swaras must be at one place. All the vyanjanas except for the hakara must be at other place. So imagine these two closed bags, one bag containing all the acha letters, other bag containing all the vyanjanas except hakara, and these two bags may be set next to each other. You cannot mix and match these bags because acha pratyahara needs to have all acha, yara pratyahara needs to have all vyanjanas except hakara. So essentially you have two bags next to each other, which means that hakara has three choices. Hakara can go all the way to the left, hakara can go in the middle, or hakara can go in the right. And then in each of the case we show a contradiction. If hakara is all the way on the left, then hakara cannot team up with the other vyanjanas because there is a bag of swaras in between. So you cannot create a hal pratyahara. If hakara is all the way on the right, then hakara cannot team up with the ach letters because there are all the yar letters in between. So you cannot create a pratyahara like atta, which needs hakara and all the swaras. And if hakara is in between, then you can create a pratyahara like atta, but you cannot create a pratyahara like shala, where sh, sh, and sa are completely different at different place in the second set. Do people understand the whole argument? Imagine that there is first set of acha letters, second set of yara letters. If the hakara comes before both the sets, then you cannot create a hala pratyahara. If hakara comes after the second set, you cannot create an atta pratyahara. In order to create atta pratyahara, hakara must be in the middle so that you can have swaras on the left side, and the right side must start with ya, va, and so on, because atta pratyahara contains ya, va, and others. But if the right side contains starts with ya, va, and so on, pratyahara like shala cannot be created because then sh, sh will not be in the proximity with hakara. That is the reason you cannot place hakara in one place and make all the pratyaharas possible. So you need to place hakara in two places. It can be either first and last, it can be middle and last. So what he chooses in his order is the middle and last. He places one hakara in the middle, which is after all the swaras are over. So exactly that's what he does. He creates acha pratyahara, he creates yara pratyahara, and hakara is placed in the middle and hakara is placed in the end. So he chooses two places and places the hakara in that place. Clear? Everybody with me so far? Any question?
Why did you say we need a separate ach? I understand. Why did you say we need a separate yara pratyaya?
Yaro nunasike nunasikova. You need a yara pratyahara, yaro nunasike nunasikova. You have a sutra, right? Yaro nunasike nunasikova. How do you define a yara pratyahara? So essentially, the idea lies in saying that there are multiple pratyaharas possible without her. In fact, if you remove her, then you can actually create two different groups. One acha and one yara with two distinct pratyaharas, and they cannot be mixed and matched, combined, which means you need two different locations for her. Think about this. We can take this up again in the next class or over the group. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Astu.
Let's go to the next one. The next method is given in your Sudha Teeka. So Sudha Teekayam tatra hakarasya prayojanam. So he has listed 8 different pratyaharas. Let's actually go through the slide. So understand this. You have all the, look at this. I told that I won't do the slides, but I could not resist making such a beautiful slide. So look at this. You have all those 14 Shiva Sutras kept over here, and you see 2 hakaras. You have one hakara starting in first place, Haya Varat, and the second hakara all that way towards the end in Hala. So you have 2 bands, and what we are going to show is there are pratyaharas that are around the first band, and there are pratyaharas around the second band, and each of the pratyahara is very valuable. So for example, you have Atta, which spans the first band but is much away from the second band. So it needs the first hakara. You have a pratyahara like Hasha, which is away from the second band but is very close to the first one. So it needs again the first hakara. You have a third pratyahara like Ina, which requires the first hakara. You have another pratyahara like Asha, which requires the first hakara. So all these pratyaharas are centered around the letters that are to the left of first hakara and to the right of first hakara, so they need only the first hakara. On the contrary, we can produce similar examples for the second hakara. You have Vala, which starts a little bit later after the first band, goes all the way till the second hakara. You have Rala, which cannot have the first band in it included in itself, but the second one. You have Jhala, which is towards the second hakara, and you have Shala, which is towards the second hakara. So all these pratyaharas, Jhala, Shala, Rala, Vala, they are centered around the second hakara away from the first hakara. Clear? So for all these pratyaharas, you need the second hakara. For the pratyaharas Atta, Hasha, Ina, and Asha, you need the first hakara. Clear so far? So what we are going to do now is we are going to go over each of these pratyaharas, all 8. We are going to understand or revise the meaning, and we are going to ask ourselves, अस्मिन् प्रत्याहारे हकारः किमर्थम् आवश्यकः? Why is h needed in each of these pratyaharas? If you give an example correctly, then it means that you have kind of justified that h is needed in two places in the current ordering of the Maheshwara Sutras. Everybody with me so far? So let's start one by one. Let's start with the Atta Pratyahara. Where is Atta Pratyahara is used? Where is Atta Pratyahara used? At Kupangnum Vyavayati. At Kupangnum Vyavayati. Why do you need a Hakara in At Kupangnum Vyavayati?
अर्हेण
Arhena. Stock example. Arhena. Okay, so Arhena, R, H and Ena. So Arhena. Therefore, you need that H. So we have justified the existence of the first Hakara because you need it in a Atta Pratyahara. Second example, Hasha Pratyahara. What is an example of the Hasha Pratyahara?
हशिच
Why do you need Hakara in Hashicha?
देवा हसति
Hashicha is not in Deva Hasanti. Hashicha is Ramo Hasati or Devo Hasati. Akarasya ruvarnasya ukaradesha bhavati kila. So Ramo Hasati, Devo Hasati. So when you have H as the Vyanjana, the Mrudu Vyanjana next to it, Utvam happens and then Guna happens.
अश् प्रत्याहारे देवा हसति
Ash Pratyahara Devahasati. So that will be the fourth example. So for the Ash Pratyahara, the example would be Devahasati Ruvarnasya Yakara Desha Bhavati Bho Bhago Go Purvasi Yoshi. So what are the sutras? For Atta, it is Atkupang Vyavayepi. For Hasha, it is Hashicha. For Asha, it is Bho Bhago Go Purvasi Yoshi. Clear? So we have created three examples, one for each. For Atta Arahena, for Hasha Ramo Hasati, for Asha Deva Hasanti. Okay?
Mahodaya, can you repeat the last one, the third one, which you just said now?
Asha is Bho Bhago Agho Apurvase Yoshi. You studied the sutram, right? Bhoho Bhagoho Aghoho.
Yes, we have studied.
Yeah. So Bhoho Bhagoho Aghoho Apurvase Yah Ashi. So Ashvarane Pare Padanta Ru Ityase Yakara Deshaha Bhavati. So Deva Hasanti. So Deva plus just plus Hasanti. So Devaru Hasanti Ityatra Devaya Hasanti iti bhavitum arhati. Agre Hali Sarvesham iti Yakara Lopaha bhavati. Clear? Let's take the middle one, Ina. You have not studied the sutram, so let me go slowly over this. The Ina Pratyahara is required in a sutram called Vibhashetaha. If anybody by any chance studied this sutram, I don't think it's much later in Kaumudi Krama. So Vibhashetaha, very peculiar sutram. So this sutram is actually in a prakaranam which is called Shaktva Prakaranam. People know the two important prakaranas in Tripadi. There is a Natva Prakaranam, Na getting converted to Na, which is at the beginning of 8.4. Starting from 8.4.1, you have Rashabhyam Nona Samanapade, that's called Natva Prakaranam. The second Prakaranam is Shaktva Prakaranam, where a Shakara Desha happens. Stock example.
We have done Adesha Pratyaya no?
Exactly.
Adesha Pratyaya.
So I was about to say that. The stock example for that is Adesha Pratyayo Ramesu iti na bhavati Rameshu iti bhavati. Munisu iti na bhavati Munishu iti bhavati. Parantu Balasu, Malasu, Latasu iti bhavati. So you need that ina letter over there. Inakoho and Adesha Pratyayo. These are the two adhikaras that go hand in hand. Now what happens is this particular section is at the end of 8.3. So somewhere over here it will start Inakoho. So it starts at this 8357 Inakoho Num Visarjaniya Sharvyavayepi Adesha Pratyayoho and so on. Actually here 8355 Apadantasya Murdhanyaha. This is the main adhikara that it starts the Shaktva Prakaranam. It starts all the way towards the end of 8.3. Apadantasya Murdhanyaha is the Shaktva Prakaranam that ends and then there is an Aktva Prakaranam. Rashabhyam Nona Samanapade. Now what happens is in case of 8.4 Anaktva, it is always Na getting converted to Na. There is no other conversion possible. It is always Na, nothing else. Whereas here what happens is it is simply a conversion to Murdhanya. Sa getting converted to Sh is a Murdhanya. Dha getting converted to Dha is also a Murdhanya. Rutu Rashana Murdha. So Dha is also a Murdhanya letter. So Dha getting converted to Dha is also a Murdhanya. and sa getting converted to sh is also a murdhanya conversion. So he has to create a vague sutram over here, like apadantasya murdhanyaha. He basically says murdhanyadeshah bhavati because he has to capture two cases. The case of sa getting converted to sh and the case of dha getting converted to dha. Now, where is this dha getting converted to dha applied? Let's take example of this mila dhatu, and in the mila dhatu, in the lit lakara, if you see, there is a mimilidhve and there is a mimilidhve. You see a dha appearing over here. This is basically an optional form. You can either have a dha or you can have a dha, and the way this approaches or the way this is created is exactly like you create a mimilidhve and then you convert it to mimilidhve optionally. If you look at the prakriya over here, I don't know what they have written over here, but till the end you have dve, and all the way in the last step you convert dve optionally into dve. So all that you are doing is you are converting dha to dha. There is no other change. The dha does not come anywhere in between. All the way till the end you reach mimilidhve, and in the last step simply the dha is replaced by dha. This is the second example of apadantasya murdhanya. One example is sa to sh, rameshu, and so on. The second example is dha to dha, which is seen over here. The sutram over there, as you can see in the prakriya over here, is vibhashetaha. This is the sutram where the ina pratyahara is demonstrated to have a requirement of hakara. So vibhashetaha is in the same 6. See, this is 8379, which is basically here. This is 8379 and it's in the same sequence. So adhikar will also be there. So apadantasya murdhanyaha adhikar is there, inkoho adhikar is there. So it's in the same section of murdhanya desha, but this is not sa to sh conversion. This is the second type of murdhanya desha. It is dha to dha conversion. So this dha to dha conversion is given by vibhashetaha. When does this conversion happen? Understand this. When does this conversion happen? The dhatu must end in the inner letter. So inner koho is there. Dhatu must end in the inner letter. Three conditions are there. Dhatu must end in the inner letter. Number one. The second number is there must be idagama in the prakriya. This is only related to the lit lakara. So let's go slow. This sutram is related to the lit lakara and ashirling, but we will keep that aside. For our discussion, it is only related to lit lakara for now. So in case of lit lakara, first the dhatu must end in the inner pratyahara. That's why I took an example of mila. The example of mila was taken because la is in the inner pratyahara. Why is it in the inner pratyahara? Let's take a look at it. Ina is from this to this ina, and la comes before that. So la is in the inner pratyahara, la comes in this inner pratyahara. So mila example was taken. For the lit lakara, there must be idagama and the pratyaya must be dve. We are specifically talking about the madhyama purusha bahuvachana pratyaya called dve. What are the pratyayas of lit lakara? Te, ate, ire, ishe, ate, idve. So idve pratyay is there. This actually reminds me. Let me do a little bit of digression and talk about this. This is something different, but you will probably like this. If you go to this particular menu and see vyakarana lekha, a lot of articles I have written in the past. One of this is Lakara Pratyavali. I don't know how many of you looked at this, but it's worth looking, taking a printout and keeping it with you. If you go to this Lakara Pratyavali, what you actually see is a document where the pratyayas, purely the pratyayas for all the 10 lakaras in Parasmaipada and Atmanipada have been enumerated. Okay, so for example, titahanti sithata mi vahama, te ate te ante saithe dve e vahe mahe, and so on. So this is for lat lakara, for lot lakara, for lit lakara, and so on. So out of these, if you go to the case of the lit lakara, where you are going an idagama for the lit lakara, if you go to this section, you can actually see the pratyayas over here. E ate ire, ishe ate idve, e I vahe I mahe. any enthusiastic Sanskrit student should have all this document memorized because it's basically pratyayas, right? Just like the way you memorize tita, hanti, sitha, thami, vahamaha, and then you take a dhatu and it becomes very easy. Patati, patata, patanti. So how can you create forms like bubhude, bubhudate, bubhudire, bubhudishe, bubhudate, bubhudidve? You have the pratyaya memorized and you just combine. So these are simply pratyayas. Radal, atus, uhu, e, itha, athu, u, in the same way, for atmane pada, e, ate, ire, ishe, ate, idve, e, ivahe, imahe. So here there is this idve pratyaya. We are only talking about this idve pratyaya. If this idve pratyaya is attached to a dhatu that ends in ina, then dha gets optionally converted to dha. Clear? So that's exactly what we are doing in case of ha. Very nice.
लिलिहिड्वेति
Exactly. So let's go there. You jumped. So liha. That's what I was about to come. So if you take a liha dhatu, it ends in ha, and that ha is in the ida pratyahara. So for the ha dhatu, the forms would be lilihidve and lilihidve. This form requires the application of vibhashetaha on the liha dhatu, which is possible if the ina pratyahara contains hakara. Clear? Another example is lu dhatu. Lu is also u. U is also in the ina pratyahara, like so. Lulu vidhve and lulu vidhve. Lulu vidhve and lulu vidhve. U is also in the ina pratyahara. E and then u. Similarly, liha, lili hidhve, lili hidhve. So the particular reason why ina pratyahara has hakara is for justifying cases like lili hidhve and lili hidhve. Clear? So that completes the four, right? Atta, hasha, ina, asha. The next four. Wala. With sutram. Now you have to justify the second hakara. Wala. With sutram.
Ardhadhatukasya valade.
Id valade. Ardhadhatukasya. Don't eat. Ardhadhatukasya id valade. What is the
Ardhadhatu.
example? What is the example? Why is her needed over there? So in ardhatukasya id valadehe, you don't really need the ha for that vala pratyahara. It is required later on in very special case where a sarvadhatuka pratyaya gets an idagama. The sarvadhatuka pratyaya for the rudadi gana, rudadibhya panchabhya, roditi, swapiti, aniti, these are the kind of words that get the idagama even in the sarvadhatuka pratyaya. So in that case, when you do the lot lakara madhyama purusha ekvachana form where he pratyaya is there, you need an idagama over there. You understand what I'm saying? So let's take the ruda dhatu. Look at this form, rudihi. Why is there an idagama over here? The form is rudihi and then
स्वपिहि इत्यपि
swapihi, rudihi. So swapihi
स्वपिहि
also, same. So five dhatus are there, right? Rudadibhya, panchabhya. I think I have explained these five dhatus. Did I show that gana in one of the other class?
Yes,
Or
yes, you did.
Yes, yes.
so there is a rudadi gana in the antarganas. You can go here. So you have these ruda, swapa, shwasa. So even if you go to swapa, it's going to be the same one. Swapihi. So see what is happening. There is a hi pratyaya, which is a sarvadhatuka pratyaya, and this pratyaya gets an idagama, I and hi. So ihi iti bhavati. Why does the sarvadhatuka pratyaya get an idagama? Rudadibhya sarvadhatuke says rudadibhya uttarasya valadehe sarvadhatukasya idagamaha bhavati. The valadi sarvadhatuka pratyaya gets an idagama for the ruda and other four dhatus. This particular sarvadhatuka pratyaya requires hakara to be present in the vala pratyahara because the he pratyaya lot lakara madhyama purusha ekavachana also is expected to get an idagama for cases like swapihi or rudihi. Clear? The next pratyahara is rala. Ralo vyupadha dhalade samsha. So set kit
कित्वातिदेश
pratyayah, set twa pratyayah akit bhavati, akitvatidesh, not kitvatidesh. It's called akitvatidesh. So twa pratyay is kit. It behaves like akit. Naktva set iti sutram, ralo vyupadha dhalade samsha is another sutram. The kit pratyaya becomes akit. So akitvati desha. Example is sneha. Sneha becomes snehitva or snihitva. The sutram is ralo vipadhadhalade samscha and ha is there at the end. This was also explained in the last class. Clear? The third pratyahara is jhala. Again, it was explained in the last session. Jhalo jhali iti sutram asti. Dah iti dhatoho adagdham iti udaharanam asmabhi drishtam. So what is jhalo jhali? It is about the lung lakara. The sicha pratyaya, which is a vikarana for the lung lakara, is removed when there is a jhala on one side and when there is another jhala on the other side. So when a sicha pratyaya is a sandwich between two jhala letters, the sich pratyaya gets removed. The example for hakara is adagdham, where dah is on one side, tam is on another side. So sicha pratyay, which is sandwich between jhala from both sides, has to be removed. So sakara lopa is what we are talking about in jhalo jali. The example was adagdham, where dah plus sicha plus tam is the configuration. The sicha pratyaya has h on the left, which is jhala. It has ta on the right, which is jhala. So sicha pratyaya is removed. Finally, the last pratyahara is shala. Shala igupadhadani taksaha. Again for the lung lakara, but in this case the chili is converted to ksa. We have discussed this in the details. So when the chili is to be converted to ksa, all that you need is a shalanta dhatu. So liha ityasya alikshat iti bhavati. If you go to the liha dhatu, alikshat iti bhavati. So this is the chili getting converted to ksa. See the prakriya. The chili pratyaya is getting converted to sa, shala igubadhadani taksaha. This have a shala pratyahara. Shala requires a hakara because for liha dhatu this sutra has to be executed. Clear so far? So then we have 4 pratyaharas towards the left, 4 pratyaharas towards the right, each of them justifying the need of one hakara. Hakara of the left and hakara of the right. So let's go to the Sudha Teeka and actually start reading the commentary. So Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi Mule Ayun Ityataha Khala iti Paryantam iti Maheshwarani Sutrani Anadi Samyarthani Eshamantyaitaha Hakaradishvakara Uchcharanartha Ladmadhyetu Itsamnyakaha. Understand how the Sudha Teeka starts. Sahitayaha avivakshaya na atra sandhikaryam. अत्र अ उण इत्यत्र स्वरद्वयम् एकरूपेण एकत्र उपस्थापितमस्ति. किमर्थमत्र सन्धिकार्यं न कृतं? Why is there no sandhi? So samhitayaः avivaksaya. There is no samhita. You want to explicitly pronounce a, e, u separately. You want to take a minor gap, minor pause in between them. Therefore, you cannot do the sandhi. Otherwise, if there is a and e coming together, you have to do a sandhi. That's the rule. If there is a samhita, there is a sandhi. But there is no samhita over here, is what he is trying to explain. Samhitayaha avivakshaya na atra sandhi karyam. And then we ask, if there is no samhita, then each word should have its own individual vibhakti. A is a separate, so it should be ending in a vibhakti pratyaya. E is a separate, it should be ending in a vibhakti pratyaya. So why is just hanging letters a, e, u? So sautratvat na etebhyo vibhaktitpattihi. These are present in the sutra. In sutra, the normal rules don't apply. So sautratvat na atra vibhaktitpattihi. Understand, they are basically questioning the way Maheshwara sutras are created. First, why is there no sandhi? The answer is because there is no samhita. If there is no samhita, then it means there are two different words. So you should have like vibhakti pratyas at the end. Like you can either say Ramo Gacchati, where you do a sandhi, or you say Ramaha and Gacchati separately, where Ramaha clearly Prathama Ekvachanam is heard. You can't just say Rama and say nothing and Gacchati. Either you do a sandhi or you have a vibhakti pratyaya. There is no third way out. So there is neither vibhakti nor there is a sandhi. So he's asking, sandhi kimartham nasti? Samhitayaha avivakshaya natra sandhi karyam. Vibhakti kimartham nasti? Sautratva. These are part of sutras, so normal rules don't apply. Which is essentially saying that you are specifically mentioning individual letters. But when we mention individual letters, how do we mention them? Akara, ikara, ukara, kakara. So we use that kara, kara, kara towards the end. So then why is kara not used? He asks a third question. Kara pratyaya kimartham nasti? So if you want to mention individual letters, at least use the kara pratyaya. Where is this kara pratyaya defined? It is ironically defined in the Krudanta Prakaranam in a sutram called Rogakhyayam Nuvul Bahulam. Rogakhyayam Nuvul Bahulam. You don't need this sutram at all. Completely random pratyas are discussed in this sutram in Siddhanta Kaumudi or even over here in Kashika, I think. But over here, if you look at this, Varnat Karaha. There is a Vartika given in Siddhanta Kaumudi in Rogakhyayam Nuvul Bahulam, which says Varnat Karaha Nirdeshe. If you want to do a Varna Nirdesha, use a Kara Pratyaya is what he says. अ इति वर्णस्य निर्देशः करणीयः अस्ति चेत् अकार इति वदतु, क इति वर्णस्य निर्देशः करणीयः अस्ति चेत् ककार इति वदतु, स इति वर्णस्य निर्देशः सकार इति वदतु. सो वर्णनिर्देशे कार इति प्रत्ययः भवति इति अस्य वार्तिकस्य आशयः. So this vartika has been referenced in the Sudha Teeka that if we are having floating individual letters without sandhi and without vibhakti, you should technically use a kar because now these are letters. As a word will get a vibhakti pratyay like aha, but if it is a normal letter, say akara, akara. So kimartham na bhavati iti chet varnat kara ityatra bahulam ityanuvartanat. In the sutram where the varnatkara vartika is present, there is a bahulam word over here. Rogakhyayam will bahulam. Kvachit bhavati, kvachit na bhavati iti arthaha. So this bahulam is taken as a part of the sutram or vartikam varnatkaraha by saying varnatkaraha bahulam. So because it is defined in the same sutram, it is okay to take that particular word in the part of the vartikam and say varnatkaraha bahulam. And therefore, because there is a bahula grahana, kvachid bhavati, kvachid na bhavati, so it may be okay to not have the kara pratyaya in the Maheshwara Sutras and just say a, e, u, ru, lu, and so on. So अनेन प्रकारेण माहेश्वर सूत्राणां रचनायाः विषये अत्र प्रश्नाः उपस्थापिताः सन्ति, तेषाम् उत्तराणि अग्रे दीयन्ते. संहितायाः अविवक्षया न सन्धिकार्यं, सौत्रत्वाद् विभक्त्युत्पत्तिः न भवति, वर्णात्कारः इति कारप्रत्ययः बहुलग्रहणात् न भवति. And therefore we can just have hanging a, e, un, rulluk and so on. After discussing all this, he then discusses the purpose of hakara in the first Shiva Sutram, Hayavarat, and the next Shiva Sutram, Hala. So everything has been taught. I am just going to read it. So Hayavarat iti, the first hakara, where is it used? Atta, asha, hasha, ina. Same pratyaharas. Atta, asha, hasha, ina. Same pratyaharas that we discussed on the slide earlier. So Hayavarat iti, atta, asha, hasha, ina pratyahareshu hakara grahanarthaha atra hakaropadeshaha avashyakaha. The first Hayavarat, the first ha is required for these pratyaharas. Kim kim prayojanam? Exactly the thing that we studied. At pratyaharaha, at kupangnum vyavayepi, ati hakara prayojanam, arhena ityatra advyavayepi natvartham. Ash, bho bhago ago apurvasya yoshi, ashi hakara prayojanam, devaha santi ityatra bho bhago iti ash nimittakam roho yatvartham. हषि हकार प्रयोजनम देवो हसति इत्यत्र हषि इति उत्तवार्थम. इणि हकार प्रयोजनम लिलिहिद्वे इत्यत्र विभाषेटः इत्यनेन वैकल्पिक ढत्वार्थम. सेम फॉर एग्जांपल्स. देन ही सेज लण इत्यस्मिन् प्रत्याहारे पुनः णकारः अस्ति. किमर्थम? ननु अयुण इत्यत्र णकार अनुबंधेन एव अनादि प्रत्याहार सिद्धौ पुनः इह नकार अनुबंध ग्रहणं व्यर्थम. Why do you have two nakaras? So vyakhyaanato vishesha pratipattihi. We have studied this in the previous class. So vyakhyaanato vishesha pratipattirnahi sandehad lakshanam iti paribhasha jnapakatvena tasya safhalyat. Then he goes to the next hakara, hal. Tatra hakarah punah kimartham? Hal iti hayavarat ityatra hakaropadeshe naiva siddhau. Once the hakara was there in hayavarat, why do you have it again over here? Hayavarat ityatra hakaropadeshe naiva siddhyau punah iha hakaropadesha vyarthaha iti na shankyam. So you have four sets of pratyaharas. vala, rala, jhala, shala, which require the second hakara. So same, vala, rala, jhala, shala, same thing he is mentioning. Vala, rala, jhala, shala pratyahareshu hakaropadeshattvena tatra हकारग्रहणस्य सार्थक्यात् there is a प्रयोजन वलि हकार प्रयोजनम रुदिहि स्वपिहि अत्र रुदादिभ्यः सार्वधातुके रलि हकार प्रयोजनम रलो विपदाधलादे संशयति सूत्रम स्निहित्वा अकित् अतिदेशः भवति इति कित्वार्थम सो रलो विपदाधलादे संशय इति विकल्पेन अकित् भवति विकल्पेन कित् भवति whatever you want झलि अदाग्धाम इत्यत्र घस्य असिद्धत्वेन हकारस्य झल्त्वात् घस्य असिद्धत्वेन is dader dhatur gha is a sutram which comes later, so you don't apply that, you apply this sutram first. Is he is trying to clarify. So झलो झलि इति सकार लोपार्थम शलि शल प्रत्याहार अस्ति चेत् शल इगुपधादनि टक्सा इत्यत्र अलिक्षत इति शिलेः क्सादेशार्थम. So 4 examples on the right and 4 examples on the left. The next paragraph was already taught some few classes ago. Let me just quickly read it. Nanu imani sutrani munitraya grantha bahirbhutatvad apramanam ityata ah maheshwarani sutrani. So vyakarana is by munitraya, but this is even beyond that, so they have to be considered important. Maheshwarani sutrani, maheshwarad agatani tatah agata iti ana, all that has been taught some few classes ago. Maheshwarat praptani iti yavata ननु महेश्वर प्रणीत सूत्राणाम एषां वैयाकरण सिद्धांत प्रकाशने उपयोगस्य अभावात् इह तदुपन्यासः व्यर्थः. So let them be from Maheshwara. Why do you want to bring it in the Vyakarana Shastra? Because they create the pratyaharas which are at the center, at the core of all the sutras or many sutras. So anadi samyarthani, ana and others pratyaharas are to be created. So ana adihi yasam taha anadayah taha samnyascha anadi samnyaha taha prayojanam artham yesham anadi samnyarthani. The word artha is used in the meaning of the word prayojana in the samnyartha. एषां सूत्राणाम् अनादि संज्ञा द्वारा व्याकरण शास्त्रे उपयोगात् न अनर्थक्यम् इति भावः. एषाम् अन्त्या इतः इति एषाम् उदाहृत सूत्राणाम् अन्त्याः अन्ते भवाः अन्त्याः णकारादिवर्णाः इत्सम्यकाः प्रत्येतव्याः इति हकारादिष्वकारः उच्चारणार्थः. So he explains that हकारादीनां सुखोच्चारणार्थम्, it's hard to just say ह य व र, so सुखोच्चारणार्थम् हकादीनां सुखोच्चारणार्थं पुनः पुनः अकार पाठ इत्यर्थः. अन्यथा ह य व र इति क्लिष्ट उच्चारणपत्तेः इति भावः. लण् मध्ये तु इत्सम्यकः. लण् सूत्रे अकारः इत्सम्यकः अस्ति. We discussed a lot about it. I explained it's not really needed. Panini did not intend it. All we discussed, but this is the general shastra that is accepted. So लण् घटित सूत्रे अकारः इत्सम्यकः र प्रत्याहार सिद्ध्यर्थं किमर्थम् आवश्यकः उरण् रपरः इति सूत्रस्थ प्रत्याहारेण रलयोः ग्रहणम् इति यावत्.
Mahodaya, the hakara used in 2 different places in the Maheshwara Sutrani. So like he could have also created sutras like in koho. He can use one pratyahara and then attach the hakara if it is needed, right? Like so that aspect.
So that argument is always there. That is correct. So he could have just used hakara in one place and then he could have just attached her as another entity with a different pratyahara. That is absolutely right.
So that will increase that many matras, right?
It's see the point is
in so many sutras, the number of matras are going to increase.
That is the only primary reason
of having pratyaharas.
That is a primary reason why the hakara is placed in 2 places. But the question was, is it possible? Yes, it is possible. It will not be alpakshara.
So and so cha, halcha or something like that, that hacha or something like that, that many times, right? So many sutras.
That is correct. That is correct. So it is mainly for alpaksharatva, but is it compulsory needed? Well, you have to do some kind of traits. Like if you think alpaksharatva is more important, this is the way to go about it. If you think that alpaksharatva is not a big deal, clarity is a big deal or avoiding hakara is a big deal, then you go the other way. It's the choices that you have to make. Yes, Sumanji.
As I said, Kshamyatam, I may have forgotten. So in the Lan Pratyahara, the Akara is not Ucharana, but for Ucharanam purposes, but for it is Anunasika, right? So that it becomes it for the Ra Pratyahara.
Correct.
But the so basically after Lakara, there are two it varnas. One is the
Correct.
Akara, which is Anunasika, and the other is Anakara, which is Halantyam.
Correct.
So then what is the reason for the Akara? Because instead of saying Ra Pratyaya, you could have said Ran Pratyaya, right?
Correct. So the reason is that Panini never had a akara in Lana as its samyaka. That is an invention by the later grammarians. We have no proof to say that in the Urandrapara there is a ra pratyahara. In fact, in the Urandrapara, the ra letter is only the letter ra. It does not talk about l at all. Is
So
what
it
the
goes back to that
correct.
that contention, that whether
Correct.
Panini really intended the pratyaya or not.
Ra pratyahara or not. And the
Sorry,
most
the
common opinion,
pratyahara.
yeah, most common opinion is not, because it's such a weird pratyahara. Like as you said, he could have created a rana pratyahara, and
Correct.
it's expected that he would do that. So that's one of the reasons. Atol rantasya. In Atol rantasya sutram, he explicitly writes ra and la separately. If he wanted a ra pratyahara, he could have used atol rantasya. People remember this? I had taught this earlier. Atol Rantasya. Look at this sutram. Atol Rantasya. In this sutram, he has la plus ra. Explicit reference of la plus ra. So why do you need la plus ra if you have a ra pratyahara? You don't need it. So the very fact that he has ra and lo explicitly written as ra in this sutram is kind of a proof that Pranini does not justified. The Panini did not think of ra pratyahara, which essentially means in the Urad Raparaha, he just took a ra and not ra and la together. But then later grammarians have taken it slightly differently. Bhashakara does not talk about the ra pratyahara. He says, I will talk about the ra pratyahara, but he never talks about the ra pratyahara. Kashika or later grammarians might have started this tradition.
And the intention of my question, Mahodaya, was there is a usage like in Koho and all that, but Hakara he chooses to add it to the Maheshwara Sutrani. So, is there any discussion around it because the Hakara is used in many places, and that's why? Is there any justifications on that? That's
So
why.
I think the only justification that you get is this kind of thing where so many pratyaharas get an hakara that it makes sense to repeat it at two places. Hakara in the earlier comes with four different pratyaharas. The second hakara comes with four different pratyaharas. So if you remove one of the hakara, all these pratyaharas, wherever they are occurring, you have to append her over there. So obviously that causes the issues on alpakshara. But if you're asking me if there is a clear discussion on this point, I have not read it in any commentaries. What would, or maybe there is some modern research, I have not come across it. What would happen if ha is removed from these pratyaharas and sutras have been changed? It's probably a topic of research.
And we know that, like I know the example of only in Koho, so I'm just wondering if there are any.
Even Atkupang Vyavayepi is another, right? At and ku and pu. So he has ku separate, pu separate in Atkupang Vyavayepi. So another example there.
Yeah, Kupvoho Kappaucha also is there. Yeah.
Kuppoho Kapaucha. Ku and pu.
So if we see even the Kakara, the Ku is also repeated in quite a
No,
few.
but there is different, right? The way ku is to be indicated is actually simpler because it's actually doing Savarna Grahanam. Otherwise, he would have. See, ku is basically ka line, which is scattered across Maheshwara Sutras.
Yeah.
Maheshwara Sutras is column wise. So, ku, pu, and so on, you cannot replace by replicate. If you want to replicate, you'll have to replicate it ka, kha, ga, ga, nga, which is significantly a big effort. You get what I'm saying, right? Maheshwara Sutras are ordered in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
column manner.
Mahodaya. Yeah, Ku has to take all
Yeah,
the letters of that Varga.
exactly.
Yeah, still it is represented as a separate letter, like, yeah.
Right. So that's this ukara being udit over here is another technique that he uses to compress. Like pratyahara is one technique and ukara being udit is another technique. So ku represents ka kha ga ga, which is a horizontal compression. Ana is essentially, or say jasha is vertical compression. So ja ba ga da, that's a vertical compression. Ku is horizontal compression. Understand what I'm saying?